Welcome to Mind Gourmet. My name is Nina Kaiser. I'm the co-founder of Mind Gourmet and, as always, your host today. My today's guest is life coach, mindfulness trainer, and author of Says Who? How One Simple Question Can Change the Way You Think Forever, Ora Nadrich. Welcome, Ora. Thank you for being my guest.
Hi, Nina. Thank you so much for having me.
I am just happy, and I would like to, before we dive into our conversation, introduce you a little more to our audience. Ora Nadrich is a certified life coach, thought coach, certified mindfulness meditation teacher, and author of Says Who? How One Simple Question Can Change the Way You Think Forever. New York Times bestselling author Marianne Williamson says, Ora Nadrich is a treasure. Her voice bears the passion of her own experience. She's able to reach deep into our hearts because she's culled so much wisdom from her own. When she speaks, I listen. When she writes, I read it. When she gives advice, I heed it. Her sparkle and power are not to be missed. Ora is a frequent blogger for the Huffington Post and has been featured as one of the mindfulness experts on Huffington Post Live. She's written articles for Women's Health, Yahoo Health, You Beauty Conscious 2, Mind Body Green, LA Yoga, Elevated Existence, Conscious Lifestyle, Success, and many other publications. Ora leads workshops on the Says Who method, a step-by-step process of confronting our negative thoughts, which are what often creates the obstacles in our lives. Providing both tangible and practical lessons, Ora students are able to address and overcome their negative thoughts and outlooks to live their lives at their highest potential. Among her other workshops are Mastering Your Mind, Living a Mindful Life, Conscious Manifestation, and Love, Sex, and Mindfulness. Ora has also facilitated a popular women's group for the last several years in Los Angeles. She has launched her first online program, the Thought Coach Certification Training Program, started by her educational organization, the IFTT, which is the Institute for Transformational Thinking. Ora, would you tell us a little bit about your journey and who you became, who you are today, and what led you to writing this beautiful book?
Thank you, Nina. Well, I say that my original Says Who moment for me was when I was not quite 15 years old. And that was that my older sister, I had two older sisters and an older brother. The sister that I'm referring to is no longer alive, and my brother also no longer alive. But my sister, Esther, who just was the most special spirit, if you will. Mm-hmm. She had a mental breakdown, and it was truly tragic, and it was devastating, and it was really traumatic, certainly for her, but it was really traumatic for me. I am the youngest of 4 children, and when that happened to her, I really went into deep fight or flight. When we go into fight or flight, it's because we are obviously in tremendous fear, but we feel that somehow our survival is threatened. Yeah. And I had no reference point for what happened to her. And when she became mentally ill, she was subsequently diagnosed with schizophrenia and manic depressive. When that happened to her, because a thought came to the foreground of my mind, and I remember it vividly, and that was that I thought to myself, oh my God, what happened to her will happen to me. Mm-hmm. And unbeknownst to me, I buried that thought, which oftentimes we do. We bury a lot of our fear-based thoughts deep into our subconscious and don't even know that we have. And that's really what happened to me. So fast forward to some time after that, I started to experience anxiety, and I didn't know why. And it started to get worse and worse with time. It was somewhat manageable, and I basically just learned how to live with it. Mm-hmm. And then again, fast forward even more, I became an actress. My career started to happen very quickly, pretty fast right out of high school. And what happened was the more I went out into life, the more my anxiety would exacerbate. And when that happened, I knew that I had a real serious problem going on, and I didn't know why. It started to impact my career, which was really taking off. And that's when I knew that I needed, as I said, guidance and help.
Yeah.
And I embarked on a psychospiritual journey. And that was really the beginning of when I went to seek out help to help me understand my own psyche better. And that was the beginning of my journey that continues on till today.
And it's so, knowing that, it's very, very impressive to see how you went through all this and how you distilled it in the Says Who method. And I know you write that it actually can easily appear that as if our thoughts are controlling us and we don't have control over them, but that this is actually not at all true. So how can we understand this, that we are not at all victim to our thoughts, even though our perception about it might be so different?
Right. You know, it's interesting to me as I embarked on this journey about learning the workings of the mind and understanding really what is our thinking mind and what are our thoughts that occupy our mind. You know, we think between 40 and 70,000 thoughts a day. That's an extraordinary amount of thinking that's going on in our minds. We're not cognizant of every thought that we have, but the thoughts that get our attention are really the ones that have the most energy. And oftentimes those are negative and fear-based thoughts. And they are the ones that really get our attention because they feel as though they're controlling us.
Right.
We feel as though we can't get out from under a thought that, whether it loops in our mind or it takes control. And again, this is something that we perceive as such, that it is controlling us. You know, I speak very often about this is our mind. It is not anybody else's mind. I have my mind. You have your mind. And I am the thinker of my mind. So therefore, I have a choice in the matter. I can decide the thoughts that I want to think, although I don't feel that way when a thought, in fact, takes us over. Once we understand that we are, as I say in Says Who, the creator and master of our internal dialogue, which creates our reality, we start to turn that perception around in that I am the thinker, therefore I have control of my mind. My mind doesn't control me. I feel it's a distortion of thinking.
Right. And is that basically what it expresses when you write in your book about owning our thoughts?
Yes, I speak about owning our thoughts in that is really the first step that we must take in beginning to change them. You know, oftentimes we don't want to own our thoughts. I say in Says Who, own your thoughts, all of them, not just the pretty ones. You know, we have a lot of thoughts in our mind that we would prefer not to, quote unquote, own.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, we want to push them as far away from our minds as we possibly can. And we do to varying degrees. But unless we own them, we cannot work with them, we cannot understand them. And this goes into some very deep areas, which is the shadow, you know, the darker aspects of ourselves, which just simply need a light shined on those parts of ourselves that we perhaps don't want to look at, even in fact disown, because it is too painful for us or too troubling for us to look at. And I highly encourage and recommend for us to do so. Until we own our thoughts, we will continue to feel owned by them, feeling as though our mind does control us, and at the effect of those thoughts, be it the darker shadow aspects of ourselves, and that's what can take us over. And it can get to be not only very complex, it can be dangerous, it can be destructive.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting and sometimes frustrating that there lies a certain very strange comfort in keeping negative thoughts. Why is that so?
That's a question that's asked a lot. My theory around that is that they are familiar to us. And it's that saying, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. So we can hold on to those thoughts that have become very familiar. They have become habitual for us, to the point where we can live with a thinking mind. We can live with thoughts that cause us deep unhappiness, and yet we will hold on to them. Other reasons for that is that sometimes we may not be conscious of any of this, that our thoughts that are negative can keep us a victim. They can keep us feeling less than who we actually can be. And we might get recognition for that. We might get the reinforcement from others because we feel sorry for ourselves, or we feel that life doesn't support us, or that we're not loved. The very things that we can perpetuate in our belief systems, we can actually feel, again, this is all perception, we can feel that we get attention for the very thoughts, be it negative, that we believe about ourselves. So it becomes a self-fulfilled prophecy. Yeah. Our thoughts support us not only in keeping us stuck in a reality that we have grown accustomed to and familiar, but can also elicit people perceiving us in a way that validates the very things that we think about ourselves.
Yeah, I totally get it. And you're speaking about the observer mode versus the reactor mode, and I wrote it down, a quote from your book that I really like and that I would like you to explain. You say, the first thing to do when an unpleasant or negative thought comes into your head and threatens to throw you off stride is to acknowledge it right away. This will help put you in the observer mode instead of the reactor mode.
Exactly right. I speak of the observer mode versus the reactor mode. For anyone who meditates, or is somebody who is into any contemplative ways in which we are with ourselves, we are able to observe ourselves, meaning we observe our thinking mind. We are like the witness of our mind. It's something that you do feel in meditation, in that you allow for the thoughts to arise in the mind and simply observe them and not react to them. You observe the thoughts in your mind as though they are clouds moving along the sky, and they never stay in the same place twice. So I take that essence, which is oftentimes experienced in meditation, and that we begin to understand how to stay in that state when we are in our life. It's one thing meditating for X amount of time. We want to be able to take the same awareness of self, the same awareness of our thoughts, and be able to just simply observe them and not react to them. It's a very important skill to utilize, because when you can observe your own mind and observe your thoughts, that's when you can heighten your awareness of them to begin to work with them, to understand them better. When we go into immediate reaction, we're losing a very precious moment of working with our thoughts, which can be very helpful for us.
Yeah. And questioning our thoughts. We can do that both in meditation, but also during our day activities that we do. But I realized after reading your book that it's one thing to catch your thoughts, but that it's extremely interesting and also helpful what happens to always ask, says who? And you say there's profound power in questioning a thought. And would you expand a little on this, and then also speak about your 7 questions that you have in Says Who?
Okay, yes. So questioning our thoughts is really important, and having the inquiry, having the investigation, to be able to ask ourselves, says who? Who is saying this thought in my mind? A thought comes into our mind. As I said, we think thousands and thousands of thoughts a day, and also a very high percentage of them are negative. So if a negative thought comes into our mind, rather than to immediately accept it readily, which we do, we can question a thought, and the very first question of the says who method is says who. Who is saying this thought in my mind? And again, going back to owning our thoughts, I am. I am telling myself that I'm not worthy. I am telling myself that I am not smart enough. I am telling myself that I am not lovable. Do you know, you begin to look at this thought so that you can begin the process of understanding whether or not that thought is even real or not. You know, just because these thoughts are coming in and out of our minds, daily, doesn't mean we have to be so quick to accept them. It is our right to question the thoughts that come in and out of our mind that have have energy in them, because a lot of those thoughts come from long ago. You know, that's part of the says who questioning method, to be able to question them to find out if they're even real or not, so that you can then be active in changing them.
Would you share the 7th question with us?
Absolutely. So the first question, says who, the title of my book, says who, a very important question to ask oneself, as I just explained, in that, you know, as I said earlier, Nina, a lot of people don't want to look at their thoughts. It's not comfortable for them. Do you know, it's something that they would prefer to stave off. And the way in which we really understand ourselves better is to, again, be willing to look at those thoughts. So the says who first question is very brave, if you will, because you're stepping forward and saying, I'm ready to look at this thought. I'm ready to take responsibility for it. I'm ready to own it. So again, first question, says who? Who is saying this thought in my mind? I am.
Yeah.
I am saying whatever that thought is that is undermining, negative, sabotaging, critical, hurtful, mean, even abusive. I am ready to begin to look at that thought. Second question, very important question. Have I heard someone say this thought before? You know, so many of our thoughts, which have turned into our core beliefs, did not originate with us. We have perhaps heard someone tell us something, oftentimes in childhood. We heard someone say something, whether it was to someone else or to ourselves, about us, and we took it on as real. I've worked with many, many people that carry into adulthood a thought, a belief about themselves that was told to them about a parent, an authority figure, a teacher, a boss, the bully on the schoolyard, and we still believe it's true. So it's very important to recognize whether or not that thought originated with you. Third question, do I like this thought? One of my favorite questions. You know, these questions are very simple. They're very what I call user-friendly. They have tremendous logic in them. When you really start to ask yourself these questions, something like, do I like this thought? What about your negative thought do you like? So many of our negative thoughts are rather unlikable.
Yes.
Is it likable to tell yourself that you're not smart or unintelligent or unworthy or unlovable? Tell me what is likable about that thought. Third question, does this thought make me feel better? Again, very similar, very logical. What is it about your negative thought that actually makes you feel better? You know, people are very hard put to come up with answers that can really support that thought. You know, does thinking those negative and critical and judgmental thoughts that you have actually make you feel better? And if so, how? You know, going back to what you said, why do we hold on to our negative thoughts? You know, someone might say, well, it makes me feel better to feel bad about myself. Okay, then that person has the right to feel bad about themselves. But logically, again, logic prevails with these questions. Our negative thoughts really don't make us feel better. They actually make us feel worse. Fourth question, does this thought work for me? How does your negative thought work for you? Does it support you? Does it empower you? Does it inspire you? Does it add something to your life in a positive way? Do you know, if you can answer that, you know, people are, again, going to have to really be honest with themselves. This is a very honest inquiry. It's time to get honest with ourselves. It's time to really want to change those thoughts that don't make us feel better and don't work for us favorably.
Yeah.
Fifth question. Do I feel in control of this thought? Sixth question, does this thought have power over me? What we talked about earlier, those thoughts can feel as though they have power over us. That's the way they feel. If you don't want to have a thought have power over you, then you might be willing to give it up. You might be willing to change it, to use what I have in my book, my release and replace technique, which is being willing to let go of a thought and replace it with its positive counterpart. So if you are really tired of feeling as though that thought has control and or power over you, you might be ready to change it, which brings us to the seventh question. Am I willing to let this thought go, or do I want to keep it? You've answered all of these questions. If you've answered them honestly to yourself, this thought does not make me feel better. I don't like this thought. This thought doesn't work for me. I don't want to feel that my mind is controlling me. I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to feel any of those questions that I answered. Then I think that by the time you get to the seventh question, do I want to keep this thought or let it go? You are ready to let that thought go.
Yeah. And how would you recommend when, and in which context or setting would we best work with those questions? Would you recommend us having a journal, for example, or just, as far as possible, always pause when we are discovering such a thought during our day's meditation?
Yeah, Nina, all of those moments where when we go into observer mode, and what I talk about the Says Who method is to really know that it's gradual, it's incremental. Any change that we set out to do doesn't happen overnight. So what we can do and help ourselves is to have those momentary pauses, if you will, whatever you think can help you. Sometimes you don't have access to a journal. You could be at work and a thought pops up in your mind. You can be in a car or on the metro or on a bus and a thought comes up. That's when observation mode, which is noting, I just had a thought that was very unkind or perhaps judgmental of the person sitting next to me. I have an awareness of this. I don't need to respond or react to it. I can simply be with it and have an awareness that that thought has come up into my mind. I don't have to attach myself to it. I can actually either keep it or I can let it go, which the book gives you more skill sets, like the release and replace technique. But I just want to say journaling, meditation, sitting quietly, even if it's for 10 minutes, just to be with your thoughts. You might have had a thought that came through your mind first thing in the morning when you got out of bed, and you weren't able to process it. You weren't able to says who it, if you will. Being aware of it, just to have an awareness of it, starts to strengthen our mindfulness abilities, which mindfulness is being in the present moment with total awareness. It's being aware that a thought has just come into my mind. It might not be, when you answer all those says who questions, it might not be a thought that I like. It might not be a thought that makes me feel better. It might not be a thought that works for me. So I'm aware that this thought has come up and I know that I want to change it. I might not be able to do it right this minute, but maybe perhaps at some point in my day, with the Says Who method, you'll be able to catch your thoughts. You'll be able to switch them out more quickly through the release and replace technique. I have 4 modules in which I work with my method and my techniques. But start with that. Start with having an awareness as the observer. And if you'd like to journal and spend some time in your day writing it down, then you can start to implement the Says Who method.
So if our listeners and people who watch this interview would love to know more about you, maybe even work with you, what are the options and where can they find you?
Well, they can find me. I am on oranadrich.com or Ora at the IFTT, which is the Institute for Transformational Thinking. But just oranadrich.com is a great way to go on to my website and to see all the things that I'm doing and working on. And all my social media handles are my name, Ora Nadrich. One of the things that I'm doing right now, Nina, that I'm very excited about is I have my institute, as you mentioned, the Institute for Transformational Thinking. I've created a specialized field of coaching, thought coaches. I was a life coach for 10 years, and I was coaching people's thoughts. So I've created a new niche of coaching called Thought Coaches, and I have an online program called the Thought Coach Certification Training Program. I've just recently done my third one. My third one was in person at my home here in Los Angeles, but my online one is international. I have now 30 graduates, and I'm so excited. That is a great way, if you feel inclined to understand your thinking mind better, to be able to embark on the transformational thinking journey. I highly recommend looking into that. Or if you're interested in becoming a thought coach, we certify you as a thought coach. So we take the Says Who method in what I've described and broken down into a 4-week course. The weekend is a weekend intensive, so that people can really use these techniques, methods, and skill sets and start to work with their mind and begin the transformational thinking process.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's also that people could become a coach through you and your institute.
Yes, very exciting.
Yeah. We will link to all important places like your website, your social media channels, your book, your institute right below this interview so everybody can find you easily. And before we close this beautiful conversation, is there anything that you feel like we haven't touched upon yet that would be important to mention before we say goodbye?
Thank you, Nina. First of all, I just want to thank you ahead of time for having me here today and having this conversation with you in Germany. It's very exciting that we can connect this way. You know, I want to leave you with that the transformational thinking journey, I think, is very important. I think that it's a time that we begin to understand the thinking mind better, and that each of us, you know, I love the Gandhi quote, be the change you wish to see in the world. And in order to really be the change, we must change within ourselves. That change begins with each and every one of us. And the ways in which we can change is to be courageous and to go within and to find out who we are, to understand ourselves better, and to understand this incredible, powerful ability that we have, and that is to think. So I commend anybody who is wanting to take that step, to take the journey, to come to know their most authentic self in the best way possible.
Thank you so much for spending this time in this space with me right here. I so appreciate it, and I so appreciate you.
Oh, Nina, thank you. And I hope when you come to Los Angeles, we can connect.
Oh yeah, I would love to. So goodbye, everybody. And always remember to take the driver's seat of that car called your life and create your lifetime to your taste. It's our pleasure here at Mind Gourmet to support you with our food for thought. Bye. And bye, Ora.
Bye, Nina.